Hello team, welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan M.S. Pearce. This is a Ukraine War Frontline update, first one for 8 days. It's an 8-day update and I really shouldn't leave it this long, so sorry about that. So quite a lot of movement on the front lines you would expect, and we'll see. We're going to start up in the Kursk direction. Actually no, before we go there, let's just get a synopsis of what's going on from Andrew Perpetua, a mapper whom I refer to an awful lot. His own map is excellent. It gives you really good detailed analysis of what's going on each day in each place. He says, I've been puzzled by the assumption that Russia's primary goal was Pokrovsk, and I'm equally surprised by the reaction to Kostyantynivka emerging as a key target. From my perspective, Russia's strategy has focused on securing areas like Kharkiv and Velika Novoselka to stabilize their flanks before shifting attention northward. These regions weren't stepping stones to Kostyantynivka so much as unresolved fronts that needed to be addressed before a broader pivot could take place. The invasion of Kursk likely delayed this shift as it forced Russia to divert manpower back inside its own borders. Russia's inability to capture Zaporizhia has been embarrassing. Their struggles to secure Toretsk, make progress northwards or bypass Toretsk have been equally so. Getting bogged down in Kharkiv for weeks was yet another embarrassment. Russia is a little more than a long string of embarrassments. They don't learn much from humiliation and continue on their predictable path. Still, Kostyantynivka appears to be a major objective. I've noted for some time that the fall of Ocheritina set the stage for this fight, with the capture of New York marking its start. I've suggested this could become the war's largest and bloodiest battle, a view that seems to hold true so far, though we're likely still in the early stages. This could extend for another year. Kostyantynivka holds significant strategic and symbolic value for Russia, and so they're likely to commit substantial resources to it. Ukraine, in turn, will probably invest heavily in its defense. Given the roughly 60-kilometer front, we will see significant Ukrainian counterattacks, potentially involving multiple brigades, aimed at reclaiming ground in key areas. 9 months in, this battle is already massive and likely far from over. And when I say a 60-kilometer front, I mean the straight line path on the map. The actual front is substantially longer than this. Okay, what's he talking about? So let's go to the map, and really we're at the center of the front line here. We're going to be concerning ourselves with this semicircle of settlements coming really down from, I guess, Seversk up here, much further to the east, but then over to Sloviansk, Kramatorsk, Druzhkivka, and then to Kostyantynivka. Zaporizhia is here, Bakhmut was here. So Kostyantynivka, this was kind of the staging area for Zaporizhia, which was a staging area for Bakhmut. And so as Zaporizhia has come under, well, the idea was Zaporizhia would fall by the end of last summer, and now we're almost a year on, and Zaporizhia hasn't fallen. So almost a year on, but well, yeah, 3/4 of a year on, and Zaporizhia hasn't fallen. And Kostyantynivka would have been the objective after Zaporizhia. It then opens up all of these to be, under a lot more pressure, more directly. They do see an awful lot of shelling, missiles, and drones. So, all of these are in the crosshairs, but Kostyantynivka is the key one. And as you can see, it's also fairly important logistically for this whole area. So what happened with the difficulty in taking Zaporizhia, it looks like they're going to be coming up from the south towards Kostyantynivka along this road particularly. And he was talking about Ocheritina, which is much further back here. Goodness me, I can't even oh, here it is, Ocheritina there. So that was kind of the key loss that kind of enable Russia to eventually take all of this area. You got New York back here, and Toretsk. They are the key to Kostyantynivka, and this is why Ukraine is trying to push back in Toretsk at the moment, and they are having some issues around here. Novolanivka being one of the areas where Russia is really trying to push on. So that it's all about Kostyantynivka, whilst also focusing on stabilizing down here, look how far they've come from Vuhledar. So all of this area has been filled in, really back from this purple line, the 2014 line there. That's what they've succeeded in the last year in taking. And Ukraine have been trying in parts, but they're only really able to manage very small tactical gains rather than any operational successes. That's why they went up into Kursk. As Andrew Perpetua said, that stopped the Russians being able to achieve those objectives that they had otherwise in mind, Pokrovsk being one of them. They've failed to take Pokrovsk, but they are continually pushing, probing, and putting pressure on Pokrovsk, as they are pretty much everywhere along the front line. Okay, so now, and it's interesting that Putin himself was, confronted with, well, not really confronted with, what he was giving a talk, I think, yesterday, and someone in the audience, also someone who is talking with at this press conference, or was a local leader from Kursk, I think. Anyway, someone was saying that Sumy is ours. Sumy, should be our city, and Putin didn't really put up any resistance to that. He's like, yeah, pretty much in agreement. So, yeah, there's a lot of pressure on Sumy as well, and if you are the United States of America and hoping that Putin is somehow going to agree to some 30-day ceasefire and then a negotiated settlement to bring about peace, he doesn't have that in mind at all. He's got his eyes possibly on Sumy, eyes on Kharkiv even, and there are claims that the Russian forces are mounting Kharkiv as well, or over the border, and clearly intends for all of Donbass still to be part of Russia, and then to move on to Dnipropetrovsk as well. So it is all rather, it's rather obvious to all of us that Russia has absolutely no intentions of a peaceful resolution as it stands. Right, let's go up to Kursk, and we can see that, according to Andrew Perpetua, some joy for the Ukrainians in pushing into this area of Kursk near to a place called Novi Put on the way to Glushkovo, which is further to the north up there. We have activity around Tetkino. It seems that even though the Ukrainians are still pushing hard there, that there hasn't been too much movement, as you can see here. No change in 8 days, right? So it seems fairly static there, even though the Ukrainians are pushing. But over here we have the Ukrainians pushing the Russians back, trying to take control of this area of land where they can keep their some equipment and stuff there, because it's trees and whatnot, helps to hide material, but of course it's also sticking out like a sore thumb. So the Russians will be hammering that. And in fact, if you go to Andrew Perpetua's map to look at activity up there, we'll see if that area has indeed had some attention. Map is struggling a little bit with me moving it too quickly there, but yes, so here we go. We're coming up to the northern area, and we can see, here we go, that, yep, the sorry, very slow, nothing there from the last day, but yes, there we can see airstrikes. So airstrikes on that area tell me that yeah, the Ukrainians are trying to put equipment there, and the Russians, I mean, it's not a big area. They could just airstrike the absolute heck out of that, as indeed it looks like they've tried. Okay, so that is there. We also see that the Russians are trying to push further to the south, near where the Ukrainians had themselves pushed up into Kursk, this area of Loknya in particular. So there's still some presence of the Ukrainians north of the border, further to the east around Gornal and the monastery there. But further to the west here, the Russians are pushed down through Novenka, and then are attacking from Bazivka down to Loknya, pushing down there in about a 4-kilometer attack they've done from there. So Andrew Perpetua hasn't really changed that because it's still quite dynamic, but Suriyat Maps has put that as now under the control of the Russians there. We'll see. They might well eventually get to that point as they are pressuring there. And then we see some fairly significant changes around the Demidovka area, where Syriac maps is pretty much showing that the Ukrainians have been fully pushed out of this Belgorod region, where they had attacked towards Demidovka and Grafovka there, but haven't really heard much since then. Not really an awful lot of footage coming out from there to see if Andrew Perpetua's has any activity detailed in that region. No, none for the last 24 hours. And then, oh my goodness, a lot of these icons. Russian scat intercepted a supercam. So a lot of Russian reconnaissance activity around that area where they're being intercepted by Ukrainian drones. That's and other ways of intercepting. That's a fascinating data point, isn't it? But yeah, not too much coming out from here for the last 3 or 4 days. The Russians hitting inside the Ukrainian borders there, as the Ukrainians will be building forces to throw at the Belgorod region, but otherwise nothing else. So yeah, I guess we'll leave it there. What other sources do we have? So that Novi Put area, Ukrainians pushing into there, as I've already mentioned. And then we have in the Kursk region, Playfra, a source saying the Russians claim to control a good chunk of Loknya. So this is to go back to here. They claim to control a good chunk of this this settlement of Loknya. But the most difficult part for them is assaulting Yanukivka, is getting to Loknya itself. For over a week, Russian paratroopers have had serious issues with supplies and troop accumulation. The Bazivka-Yanukivka road is under complete Ukrainian drone control, and everything that appears there is immediately struck. As such, going between villages, accumulating and assaulting one, even if a foothold was already gained, results as a much harder task than normal. I'm going to go back to Andrew Perpetua's map, because what you can see in this attack down into Loknya is indeed that this road down there is, you can see the drones following the Russians as they attack down into Loknya. I don't know how successful they were in taking any of Loknya, but they certainly have been hit with Ukrainian drones, and they do have that drone presence there. But there you go. And what about Tekhino? Someone says Ukraine was able to capture about half the settlement and some fields around the other half, seriously complicating logistics for the other part of the settlement. According to the Russians, they were heavily relying on FPVs to cut Russian reinforcements, reserves and supplies, but factually, it's a standstill for now. They're not able to advance any further, is a claim from this particular source. So there you go. Right, moving on, we are going to come out of the northern border area and come down to the area around Kupiansk. Interesting that Andrew Perpetua has a little bit of the center of Vovchansk. The Russians have increased control there. That's slightly worrying because that's been fairly consistently unmoving. But the Ukrainians had even pushed the Russians back over here by Lipsy, and there had been a bit of joy in the Vovchansk area, but it looks like the Russians are pushing back there now. So anyway, over to Kupiansk, a bit north of Kupiansk, some minor gains, maybe even a little bit of just rejigging as far as Andrew Perpetua is concerned, and nothing until we get down to what I'll call the Pischany sector here, where they've got up to the Oskil River. The Ukrainians pushing back north of Pischany at a place called, it's not turning up because it's on top of it there. Is this Hlushkivka? Oh no, it's over here, Hlushkivka. There you go. So glad my memory is still sort of working. Pro-Ukrainian channel reports the Ukrainians advancing on Hlushkivka in the Kupiansk direction. So that is somewhere around here, but actually could well be, yeah. Okay, so that is around here. That's exactly there. So the Ukrainians having some joy in pushing the Russians back there. But again, where their successes are coming are just very small. attempts and sometimes successes in pushing the Russians back, but nothing like wide-ranging, nothing of operational significance. Not hugely so. I guess they're just trying to give the Russians something to think about so they don't just continue and advance without any kind of pressure on them. Next source here, that's Toretsk, so further down to the south. So on the way to Toretsk, we can see that Russians, according to Syriac maps, are making some gains here and there in a number of places. This is a Toretsk Terny sector here. So you've got Toretsk down there, Terny in the middle now, that has been pretty much captured by the Russians, although there is a little bit of a difference between the mappers here. A Syriac map saying the Russians are making the odd bit of gain in fields to the west of Terny. But some claims that the Ukrainians are pushing back. So here we have a claim around here. So it's this area there, which Syriac maps has admitted that there could be some success for the Ukrainians there. That's just north of this particular site of interest there, and going across to the east as well. So basically this kind of section the Ukrainians have retaken doesn't feature exactly on Syriac maps' understanding of what's going on. Right, okay, so some gains for Syriac maps as well in the Bilahorivka direction. Really significant difference between the mappers here. This is around Verkhnokamianska. Really worrying as they're getting closer and closer to Siversk. I mean, I tried to go to Siversk when I was out there last time. No, actually February 2024. Goodness me. So a year and a half ago I tried to get to Siversk, and we didn't have the paperwork to get there at the time because it was a last minute, oh right, Anton's going there, we're going to go meet Anton in a hospital there. He was providing for base UA some support for the hospital, and we're going to meet him. But so because we did a kind of like change of plans, we didn't have the paperwork for the checkpoints, so we got to some sort of block point on the way there and we couldn't get to Siversk. But now, a year and a half later, the Russians have advanced considerably in a lot of places, and Siversk is even more vulnerable at the moment. But as we come further down, we come to Chasiv Yar and see really that there's very little change to Chasiv Yar. Okay, slight bit of the center, according to Syriac maps, the Russians have gained control of. That's certainly worrying, but the Ukrainians still doing a good job to hold the Russians at bay. It all becomes slightly more worrying when you get further to the south. So we're going to start with Toretsk and just see if... Yeah, so, okay, we're going to go to this play for a source again to talk about Toretsk area. We'll start with a previous claim here. I'll just try and give you an understanding of Toretsk at the moment. So we have further to the north around a place called Dachna, north of the railway line, activity. And then we have these, there was a motorcycle assault up the way up here by the Russians that was kind of hit as it went. I think Andrew Perpetua's map kind of gives an indication of this with arrows and everything. And that seemed to go through the Ukrainian-controlled land there, which all territory there. So that was all a bit interesting. Yeah, so here it is. So this motorbike assault came up and round there, and yeah, you can see that motorbikes. You had drones hitting, Ukrainian drones hitting along there. Russian assault, motorbike assault, and then Russian motorcycle destroyed. So they got that far before getting destroyed. But it is interesting that it moved all the way through there. There is, but of course, Syriac maps has that under Russian control rather than that just being a charge of the light brigade and then getting eventually taken out. But if we go back to the middle of Toretsk, if you remember last time I was telling you about how, is it worth me writing on here? Yeah, let's do some drawing on a page. So the Ukrainians took control over this kind of area. They also had control over, I think, one of these buildings. The Russians were attacking from the other building, and they were trying to get hold of these high-rise apartment blocks there, because that gave them a good view down here onto the lower ground. They also had control up here and then somewhere else around here. And the idea was thinking is that because they did this kind of lightning attack down the road in order to get there and drop some troops off around here, you're thinking, okay, they can't just leave those people there to good luck, hope you do all right. What were they going to do in terms of following up? And they have been, it seems, trying to attack from up here to try and support them down there, and possibly also from other directions. So although it seems like quite a long time between those different attacks, it does seem, I wonder if Andrew Perpetua has any of the sort of sense of what's going on here. Not particularly. Ukrainians then shelling around there. Ukrainian drones active on the edges. But yes, so that was the direction of their attack. But we just don't know whether they're still actually active there and whether they're trying to support them. There was evidence a few days ago, I think, of the Russians shelling here, which is exactly where we thought they were, in those buildings. So that was back on the 15th. We're now on the 21st. So 6 days ago, they were still shelling that building, but I don't know whether the Ukrainians have any presence there still. I mean, it's a long time since they attacked into there. So this is the Ukrainians, I presume, and some regaining of ground there, trying to retake some of this ground, some of this land, some of Toretsk, so that the Russians don't just carry on marching towards Kostyantynivka. They need to be regaining here. They need to stop the Russians over here, and they need to stop the Russians coming out through this New York direction, or slightly further to the east, Pantelemonivka, down there. So lots of challenge for the Ukrainians around here. There's just one other interesting area where Andrew Perpetua has the Russians still possibly in some settlements there, but having been cut off here, and that being now grey zone. And so trying to support their Russian troops here means sort of running through down this road or through this land there, and could be challenging for them. So this is all happening around here. And as we go further to the west, we can see how much the Russians are filling in. They do these motorbike assaults like they've done up here, and they keep doing them, dropping people off, pushing, and then eventually they take control. This is what I talked about in my hits and losses video this morning, is that the Russians are having success with getting through the corridors of drone control that the Ukrainians have, that drone asymmetry and the superiority in the air, if you like. They are able to penetrate that now, because instead of driving at the Ukrainians with 3 APCs full of 20 Russian troops each, therefore only being a set of 3 different targets. You hit one of these APCs or infantry fighting vehicles, you immobilize it and take out all the stragglers with drones. You're really only looking at one main target. You put those 60 people on motorcycles, you got 60 motorcycles, or 40 motorcycles, some of them with 2 people on, and they can drive through minefields more easily. They can drive through these drone corridors more easily, overwhelm the drones. There aren't enough drones to take them out. And then they can get to the second line of defense, where you've got machine gunners and mortar crews. And at the same time, the Russians are focusing on hitting drone operators as well. So there is a concerted effort to wrest the advantage that the Ukrainians have had defensively in having this drone control over these areas. And I wonder whether, certainly they've used a lot of motorbike attacks in this area, and I think you're seeing the fruits of the Russian labours there. Yes, it is costing them, obviously, in troops and equipment, but this is where they're having more success, rather than We're trying to press on into Pokrovsk. You've got some decent trench lines for the Ukrainians around there. A lot of defences built. But further to the east, it is definitely a growing problem for the Ukrainians, and Kostyantynivka is looking, more and more vulnerable with each passing week. Further to the south of Pokrovsk, as according to Syriac maps at least, the Russians are making some fairly consistent and considerable advances. The Ukrainians may be kicking back in Horyknova, but otherwise the Russians having some success there. Let's look at a few of these sources. So from the field, they say that the western and northern outskirts of Toretsk are mostly a grey zone. So sorry, I meant to do this earlier. I was just giving you some basics and then forgot what I was doing. So let's go back to Toretsk. Just get Playfra to talk us through what they think is happening here. So these grey zones around here, it's hard to know anything for sure there. At the moment, the most pressing problem for Ukrainians is the sky. Russian FPVs are extremely active, both at the zero line and up to 12 to 15 kilometers from it, hunting for logistics, artillery and personnel. Normal FPVs are still prevalent in Toretsk relative to fiber optics, but they're also common to see there. Their assault tactics are unchanged. Small groups that are defeated easily, but sometimes due to sheer scale of the assaults, are able to cling on to some ruins and advance. So their assault tactics are unchanged, someone says. Small groups that are defeated easily. How does this compare with the Ukrainians? They have launched countless counter-assaults. Why haven't they liberated Toretsk yet? Very simply, they have also failed. They tried with infiltrations that worked, but were later eliminated. We don't know if their goal was just delaying accumulation or reorganizing behind the city or actually recapturing ground. Then they tried with armored columns, which also ended terribly. Both sides failed their assaults mostly. In a city as destroyed as Toretsk, it's nothing special, but the Russians can try numerically more assaults and hope that a larger amount of them are successful, even if the ratio of attempts to successes is lower than the Ukrainians probably. In other words, sheer weight of numbers. So then Playfra goes on to say, a couple of additions again from the field. The Russians are currently pushing hard on the lakes north of the city and the Toretsk mine, which has been repeatedly hit by ballistic missiles in the past few days. So it's interesting that they're really trying to hit this mine there. That's is that the Toretsk mine around here? Hit by ballistic missiles, and you've got these lakes up here. So this is where the motorcycle attacks have happened. I wonder if we've got this marked on Andrew's map here to see if there are so Russian shelling. Yeah, just going to see if we have a ballistic missile. Yeah, there we go. So there's it's an ATGM strike. Is that both ATGMs? Anti-tank guided missile. So actually that's not a ballistic missile, that's an ATGM strike. But yeah, shelling and all sorts going on. As you can see, the Russians really hammering in a number of these places. Russian corps. So anyway, you can go and check out Andrew Perpetua's map to see what sort of activities taking place all around here. But the idea is that there is a ballistic missile as well. I don't know when that was though, but we'll carry on going through this, which has been repeatedly hit by ballistic missiles in the past few days. In some parts of the direction, they combine infantry attacks and heavy FPV barrages. According to my source, this works exclusively if the defender unit is badly coordinated, poorly supplied and tired. Other than this, they are very often repelled. At the moment, they are worried that the breakthrough at Novoolenivka might expand further to Stepanivka and south of Kostyantynivka and threaten a whole Toretsk group of forces with supplies. Okay, so that is to say that they are worried. So we're going to go to Novoolenivka, which is much further over here. This is Novoolenivka. So they're worried about this attack coming up here, threatening the Toretsk grouping and obviously Kostyantynivka. So yeah, not too different from what I was saying. And then the Russians really just trying to fill in a gap and equalize all these front lines. all the way down. I mean, there's a lot of talk about Bakhtir. Just see if there's any other. Actually, Grayskull here has some claims. Sorry, I'm going backwards and forwards because I keep forgetting to go to my sources. So there is a claim that the Ukrainians have pushed back the Russians in the Dachnia area, which is here. And actually, you can see that from those blue pins from Suryat maps. There you go. The Ukrainians have reportedly advanced east of Dachny there. Okay, next one. Russian armed forces started their first strategically important maneuver of 2025. So this is the idea that this is all part of their big maneuver. In fact, I will read through this thread because Clement Muller often does some really good analyses. After months of preparation, Russian army is trying to cut the Kursk Kostyantynivka front line, breaching the Donbass front in the middle. After months of struggle west of Kursk and in Toretsk, Russian army has switched its offensive potential to the Ocheritina direction, so that's here. That's kind of between your Toretsk and your Kursk area. After striking a progress of nearly 10 kilometers 3 weeks ago, they are now pushing north further than the Kursk Kostyantynivka highway. Russian army has captured in a few days a number of small settlements: Malinivka, Novopoltavka, Novoolenivka, and Alexandropil. This fast advance allowed them to get through an important fortified line on the Kursk Kostyantynivka highway, which is a real challenge for the Ukrainians. Russian army entrance into Mirolubivka also shows they want to continue north to Novoekonomichna to further enter Mirnohrad to encircle Pokrovsk from the west. Okay, so I'm going to go back to my map to just explain what that is all about. So arguably, this isn't just about moving up to Kostyantynivka, but it's also to come around the back so that they can flank Mirnohrad and then Pokrovsk. So you have a lot of these. We're talking about Malinivka there. This is the village that was just mentioned, Mirolubivka. We've also heard Novopoltavka there. So all these ones that are now the other side of the highway. This is a highway you've had that junction that was fought over for quite a long time. Now the Russians are past that junction and are past the highway and now moving on. So this is a really worrying, I think, set of advances for the Russians, worrying for the Ukrainians. This long-awaited maneuver by Russian forces may be strategically important at the scale of the battle in Donbass. They could continue north to Druzhkivka, significantly cutting Pokrovsk and Dnipropetrovsk Oblast from Kostyantynivka and Kramatorsk. And this could be why. I mean, if you want to start then going back to think of the strategies of, like the political strategies of Putin, like he's thinking, right, there's some interesting advances for the Russians here, for my guys, he's thinking, that actually could be really significant. You could see Kostyantynivka fall, you could see Pokrovsk fall, and that then challenges Druzhkivka, Kramatorsk, Sloviansk. You're then thinking, right, Donbass, that's mine. We could think about Dnipropetrovsk. All we need is time, and we'll just feed in more and more troops into this problem because the Ukrainians can't withstand the sheer numerical advantage that we consistently have. And so he's not going to want to do a ceasefire. And as long as Trump threatens to walk away, then Putin is going to be happy. If Trump walks away from the war in Ukraine, then they're not getting any extra help, the Ukrainians, from the Americans, and the Russians will just keep going on. He's like, well, we're doing it now, we'll continue doing what we're doing, and we will take these places. And, you know, they could well do. After this progress, there are multiple hypotheses as to what could happen. The most evident would be an offensive from the high ground to Druzhkivka. So here we have a number of different maps to show you what could be the option for the Russians. So he's then, oops, I've lost myself. So after this progress, multiple hypotheses could take place. So the most evident would be an offensive from the high ground to Zaporizhia and Kostyantynivka, forcing a large-scale Ukrainian retreat from central Donbass and preparing the battle for Kramatorsk. So that's up going through this semicircle of towns and cities. Alternatively, or at the same time, Russian forces could try to encircle Pokrovsk or taking Zaporizhia, a significant... I hate it when it does that, as I keep saying, a significant supply hub in western Toretsk Oblast. This particular progress could be followed by an infiltration in Pokrovsk after an isolation from the west. But what about the fortifications? We can still find approximately 2 anti-tank ditches and multiple trenches. However, there are not enough. The western and northern Pokrovsk axis are more defended. Anyway, Russia will soon have to deal with larger fortifications, especially barbed wire and big ditches against infantry. Ukrainian engineering units are switching from large to small and more numerous trenches. It's too early to see any result. In parallel, the Russian army is set to enter Dnipropetrovsk Oblast in the coming weeks. Do you know what? Twitter is so annoying. In the coming weeks, after a long delaying operation on the Novopavlivka front line. Also on the Zaporizhia front line, Russian forces are consolidating their positions in Bakhmut, and we're going to come to this in a second. I think this is quite an important area. There's a lot of fighting over Bakhmut. And will face only the last 2 towns, Komar and Odradne, before reaching the river's junction. The most recent Russian progression between the towns of Kostyantynivka and Pokrovsk also allows drone teams to target the Zaporizhia-Kramatorsk highway, threatening supplies to the capital city of Ukrainian-controlled Donbass. 1 year ago, Russian forces seized Ocheritina and made large progresses between Pokrovsk and Kharkiv during the summer until December. This year, Russia will try to do it again, this time in the north, and faster if they want to conquer a city this time. So, that is to say, this highway, the Zaporizhia Kramatorsk highway, that this semicircle, if they are moving further north, they're going to have the ability to hit this really important set of roads with drones. They have, they are just advancing in all the places mentioned. We've also got this area, Bakhmut, that's where we're talking about there. That's the town that's just been mentioned a number of times. Just to finish off now, let's get a more general overview. Russian army has a superior manpower. Some say more than 30,000 recruits a month, allowing them to wage the trench war. Ukraine forces lack men and switch to a more flexible defense. On a larger scale, the war is extending to the long Ukrainian-Russian border at full scale, meaning both sides need to move more troops there. The advantage is Russian everywhere, and Ukrainian defences is mainly done by drones, obstacles and trench warfare. The negotiations are not advancing because Russia does not want to negotiate. They showed what they wanted in Istanbul. Nothing's changed since 2022. While they control less territory, I will soon analyse those negotiations. Okay, so there you go. That's a bit of a synopsis there. Yep, no, the Russians aren't interested in negotiating at all, are they? Okay. Interesting one. That's from the 19th, saying the Ukrainians actually broke through in Toretsk, around near that mine that we were talking about. But anyway, we've gone past Toretsk now. So we're going to go to Bakhmut. That is this area here. Now, this was an area where the Russians said they controlled. There was some flag waving going on. Then there were Ukrainian soldiers standing on a Russian flag as a kind of, screw you, no, you don't control Bakhmut. And so both sides are making these kind of very visual PR type claims concerning Bakhmut. But the claim from the 17th, so that's going back 4 days, is that the Ukrainians pushed back into there and cleared the Russians out of it. And so here's a video, actually. I'm glad I've got that here, because that's... I'm not talking absolute nonsense. So this is a video from Bakhmut where the Ukrainians are standing on a Russian flag to say, no, we are controlling this area. So there you go. that is what's going on here. So this is it looks like quite a key town holding out, but there are Russians also trying to either hit here with drones and everything, as you'd expect, and potentially move to there. So if they're having trouble with Bakhmut, they can come at it from the north. So that's Oleksivka. So that's a worry for the Ukrainians there. Just see if there's any activity there on Andrew's map. As you can see, there's activity bloody everywhere. But particularly where I was talking about. So there's Bakhmut. Russians shelling there. That's the 8th. We need to go forward now. So you can see over time, lots of shelling and activity. The Russians hitting Bakhmut. And then it all became a grey zone with, Ukrainians then hitting. Then the Russians absolutely hammering it with multiple launch rocket systems. And then this is what I was talking about up here in Oleksivka. You can see they were really focusing activity up there. So nothing. And then Bosch absolutely hammering it, because you're going to, although there's no change there, you're expecting the Russians are to be moving into there as they're shaping it now, hammering it. I'm sure we'll see on the next mapping update, lots of red icons there, and then fighting over Bakhmut as well. Anyway, as you can see, lots of activity all around there. And then further to the south, Velika Novoselka is a distant memory, isn't it? As the Russians are just consistently moving further and further to the west. And I think this here is Dnipropetrovsk, a tiny distance between where the Russians are now, Zelene Pole, to that corner of Dnipropetrovsk. And if they can get into there, then that might give the Russians the ability to say, right, now we're going to add that to our constitution. And in fact, the Ukrainians now need to pull out of Dnipropetrovsk because that's now part of Russia. So that's certainly a worry. Further to the west around Kamyanska, Andrew Popech has agreed that the Russians have been pushing further to the north there, and that is pretty worrying as well. There are some claims that actually they're going to get closer and closer to Zaporizhia. So that there is a river there that hopefully provides something of an obstacle, but they've already partly got over some of that. It's kind of like you can see the difference. I don't know if I can toggle the layer in this. I know in Andrew's one, if we go, we can look at the river, the rivers more easily with different layers here. So if we just focus in on Kamyanska, and then you'll be able to see there. You can see already the physical geography looking different there. Then once we do this one, hopefully you'll be able to see a little difference. Here you go, just playing around with the layers to try and get a sense of what's going on. Now, of course, this Zaporizhia reservoir is no longer really an active reservoir, but yeah, you've got this river coming down there. You've got another one going up there. They're already getting across this one further to the south. If they can get across there, then of course, you're worrying about them moving on further and further towards Zaporizhia as a main city up there, and that is definitely a concern for the Ukrainians. So lots for the Ukrainians to think about at the moment. The Russians are grinding on as ever, and it is definitely a concern in a number of different places on the front line. Hopefully, the Ukrainians will be able to come up with something, but you do wonder what they have in reserve themselves. As far as equipment goes, I think they're okay for equipment. Europeans are coming up and continuing to provide aid packages. What they just desperately need is, I think, huge numbers of jets like F-16s, Gripens, even MiG-29s from Poland to be nice. And they need all the armaments they can put on those. They need to be flying at the Russians and dropping guided glide bombs 10 a penny there, just absolutely hammering the Russians with guided glide bombs. They need air defenses, of course, and they need just missiles and one-way attack drones to absolutely hammer the Russians in Russia. I'm convinced still that the key to Ukraine's success is an economic capitulation of Russia, whereby their hydrocarbon industry is hammered and the oil price cap screws them over. Sanctions hit them hard, and this is why it's so frustrating that Trump is doing everything he can to allow Russia to win, because if the US put secondary sanctions on China and India with regard to Russia would be in all sorts of trouble, and then Ukraine, I think, would be able to start to have an effect on the battlefield, because everything for Russia would be a real issue back at home inside their own borders. So those are my thoughts, and that's why I'm so frustrated with the direction of travel for the United States over the last 3 months. Anyway, let me know what you think. You take care, and I'll speak to you soon.